harassing communications was you sending the picture.
No.
That makes me lose respect for Martell.
If it was true.
I assumed it was true.
You assumed it was?
Now that he's saying that it's not true, how do you feel about it?
I don't know if I can believe Martell.
You don't believe me? I've been a liar about things that we've been through over the years, and a lot of experiences that you've had with me. I've been a liar.
Martell Holt is finally talking, but this time something feels different. At 42 years old, he's no longer hiding behind quick responses, loud defenses, or carefully crafted excuses. The tone has shifted, the energy has changed, and for the first time in a long time, people are not just listening to what he's saying, they're watching how he's saying it. Because when someone who spent years deflecting suddenly starts opening up, you can't help but wonder, what changed?
Why he would say that, why he would throw me in the middle of that. And so him and Marcel was going back and forth. Unfortunately, edit didn't show what Marcel said, but they showed what what Martell said. So you guys really didn't see or hear everything that Marcel was saying to him, because Marcel was dropping receipts and he was naming guys who Martell have slept with in Huntsville.
Is that okay? We gotta say a legend.
No, it's not a legend. It's not a legend.
I mean, this is.
Because Carlos, let me tell you. So you guys have known. You said that I've been quiet. I know a lot more than what I say. And for years, Marcel have been like, no, T, don't do that. No, T, don't do that. And we really have been trying not to go there with Martell because
fans have followed Martell's journey for years. They've seen the highs, the heartbreak, the chaos, and the repeated attempts to rewrite the narrative. But now, the man who once pushed back on every accusation is sitting in a space that looks a lot like reflection, and it's making people uncomfortable, not because it's shocking, but because it feels real. What nobody expected was that the same man who once fought so hard to protect his image would now be the one slowly peeling it apart. And here's where things get complicated. Because opening up doesn't always mean healing. Sometimes it just means the truth is getting harder to carry. And at 42, Martell Holt looks like a man who can't carry it the same way anymore.
So what's the problem with you then?
Every time he opens his mouth and says something about Marcel, he gonna be talking about Martell.
I never say about you.
Tell about what Marcel knows about Martell. I'm telling you right now, I don't have no respect for you.
Okay, it's like, dude, go, and it's like, we together. I'm not saying nothing about it.
Oh, we've never been together.
Where the pictures at, Martell? Let me see.
Cheers, my boy.
Go ahead and say your shit. Keep going, big fella. Keep going, big fella.
I'm done. I'm done. Hold up.
So what is he finally admitting? Why are fans saying the truth is starting to show? And is this the beginning of real change, or just another chapter in a cycle people have seen before? To understand why this moment feels so heavy, you have to go back to the version of Martell that people once believed in. Before the scandals, before the public fallout, before his name became tied to controversy, Martell Holt had a story that looked inspiring from the outside. He was a businessman, a family man, a husband who stood beside a strong and successful wife. Together, they built something that people admired. Their relationship wasn't just about love, it looked like partnership, ambition, and shared goals.
This is so sad.
It seems.
No, it's not.
Hold on. Martell Melody, hold on. Please. Hold on.
Okay.
Destiny.
I don't want nothing and don't need nothing. God is my source and has been since I left your dusty ass.
Okay.
Viewers saw a man who appeared confident, driven, and committed to building a legacy. And for a while, that image held strong. But behind that image, there were cracks forming that nobody could see at first. Because sometimes the pressure to maintain a perfect life becomes heavier than the truth itself. Martell wasn't just dealing with business challenges or everyday relationship struggles. There was something deeper, something rooted in pride, control, and a need for validation that he didn't fully understand at the time. As his partner continued to grow and evolve, stepping into her own power, it created a shift in their dynamic. And instead of adjusting, instead of growing alongside that change,
I just hate that this narrative is going around and, bloggers picking things up and, certain people trying to destroy me. But it's not going to happen, though. I'm not going to allow it to happen.
Martell started to pull away from it. That's where the distance began. And then came the choices that would change everything. The affair wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't something that happened once and ended quietly. It was a decision that continued over time, even as the consequences became clearer. Even as the damage became impossible to ignore, the pattern didn't stop. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't just break a relationship, it shattered an image. Suddenly, the man people admired became the man people questioned. And instead of stepping into accountability, Martell did what many people do when faced with uncomfortable truth. He resisted it.
He explained it away. He redirected the conversation. He tried to justify actions that didn't have justification. And for a while, he seemed determined to convince the world that there was more to the story than what people saw. But the more he spoke, the more people felt like they were hearing everything except the one thing they were waiting for: real accountability. And that's when the shift began. Because people can forgive mistakes, they can even understand bad decisions, but what they struggle with is a pattern that never changes.
I also did an interview out here saying, I'm like, why would this dude even fix his mouth to say something about much?
Years passed, and instead of growth, it felt like repetition. The same emotional reactions, the same defensive tone, the same refusal to fully own the damage that had been done. And slowly, support started to fade. Fans who once defended him began to step back, not because they wanted to turn against him, but because it became harder to recognize the man they once believed in. But here's the twist. Just when it felt like Martell had settled into that cycle for good, something changed. Recently, in interviews, conversations, and moments that weren't as controlled as before, Martell started to open up in a way people hadn't seen. Not perfectly, not completely, but noticeably. His tone softened, his words slowed down, and instead of immediately pushing blame outward, there were moments, small but significant, where he turned inward. He started talking about feeling lost, about struggling with how everything unfolded, about realizing that some of his actions didn't just affect his relationship, they affected his entire life. And for the first time, it didn't sound like he was trying to win an argument. It sounded like he was trying to understand himself. Now, let's be clear, this isn't a full transformation. This isn't a complete turnaround where everything is suddenly fixed, but it's a crack in the armor. And sometimes that's where the truth begins to show. Because when someone who has spent years protecting their ego finally starts questioning it, that's not a small moment, that's a breaking point. But what nobody expected was how emotional those moments would feel. There were times when Martell seemed tired, not physically but emotionally, like someone who had been carrying the weight of his own decisions for longer than he was willing to admit. He spoke about regret, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, almost hesitant way, and that hesitation told people everything.
Because regret hits differently when it's real. It's not loud, it's not defensive, it's not filled with explanations. It's heavy. It's uncomfortable, and it doesn't need to be announced to be felt. Fans picked up on that immediately. Some believed this was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment where Martell finally starts to face himself honestly. Others weren't so convinced, because they've seen glimpses of vulnerability before, only for them to disappear when things got uncomfortable again. And that's the question hanging over everything right now. Is this real change or just another temporary shift? Because opening up is one thing, sustaining that openness is something completely different, and history has made people cautious. But here's what makes this moment stand out. Martell isn't just talking about what happened anymore.
He's starting to talk about how it changed him, and that's where things get deeper. Because he's acknowledging that the consequences didn't stop at the end of his relationship. They followed him into every part of his life, his reputation, his friendships, his role as a father, and even how he sees himself. That kind of awareness doesn't come easily. It comes after time, after loss, after realizing that the things you tried to ignore didn't actually go away. They just waited. And now, at 42, it looks like Martell is finally sitting with that reality. But sitting with it doesn't mean he's made peace with it. There's still tension, still moments where you can see the old patterns trying to surface, still traces of defensiveness that haven't completely disappeared. And that's what makes this so real. Because growth isn't clean. It's messy, it's uncomfortable, and it doesn't happen overnight. And maybe, just maybe, this is what that process looks like for him. But the emotional impact of all of this goes far beyond Martell himself, because his journey hasn't happened in isolation. There are children involved, children who will one day understand the full story of what happened between their parents. There are relationships that have been permanently changed. There are people who had to rebuild their lives while he was still figuring out his own. And that's where the weight of this moment really hits, because every decision he made didn't just affect him, it created ripple effects that are still being felt. And now, as he begins to open up, there's a question that lingers in the background. Is this too late? Not for his personal growth, but for the people who were affected along the way. Because healing for one person doesn't automatically heal everyone else. And sometimes accountability comes after the damage has already been done. But that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It just means it matters in a different way. Martell's children are growing up in a world where their father's story has been public, discussed, and analyzed by people who don't know them personally. That's not something you can undo. But what he does from this point forward, that still matters. The way he shows up now, the way he takes responsibility now, the way he chooses growth over ego now. That's what will shape how his story continues. And for the first time in a long time, it feels like he understands that. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough for people to notice. And that's why fans are paying attention again, not because they've forgotten the past, but because they're wondering if the future might look different. Still, not everyone is ready to believe it. Some people feel like this is just another moment that will fade, another version of Martell that will disappear the moment things get difficult again. And honestly, that's a fair concern, because trust isn't rebuilt through words, it's rebuilt through consistency, through actions that match the things being said, through choices that show real change over time. And that's the part that hasn't been proven yet. But here's the thing about moments like this. They don't guarantee change. They just create the opportunity for it. And what Martell does with that opportunity will determine everything. At 42, he's standing in a space that looks very different from where he once stood. The confidence is still there, but it's quieter. The presence is still there, but it's less controlled. And the truth is finally starting to come through, whether he's ready for it or not. Because when you stop fighting the narrative and start facing it, things shift. And that's exactly what people are seeing now. Not a perfect man, not a fully healed man, but a man who is beginning to realize that the version of himself he tried to protect for so long might not be the version he needs to hold on to anymore. And maybe that's the real story here. Not the scandal, not the past, but the moment where someone finally starts to see themselves clearly, because that's where everything begins. Or where everything ends. And right now, Martell Holt is standing right in the middle of that moment. The truth is showing. The question is, what is he going to do with it?